Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to this special edition of the Deeper Dive podcast at Hopevale Church. I'm not really sure if I should call it a Deeper Dive podcast because we're not here today to talk about a sermon or what necessarily happened in church yesterday. I'm sitting here with Adam Harbaugh, who has been a pastor at Hopevale for 15 years. And we are here to talk, man, because just recently... we made the announcement, you made the announcement, we told the church yesterday that after a 15-year run, you are transitioning off staff here in the next couple weeks. And so we wanted to take some time, not try to cram it into, a 3-minute pastoral moment in the service, but actually be able to talk about everything the Lord's up to and how he's working in your life and Kim's in your family's life. And then also want to give you a chance at the end to give a parting shot to Hopevale. This is going to be a hard one for me because, as I mentioned yesterday in church, I have a wide range of emotions that I'm feeling as we sit down to have this conversation. There's a desire on my part to honor the legacy that you've had and that you've built. There's a desire to give you a chance to explain to people in the congregation who are like, what are you doing? Why are you leaving? What's going on? And all of that. And I have a desire to remind the people of Hopevale that Jesus still has Hopevale, and Adam Harbaugh is awesome, but Jesus can do anything even without it.
It's all good.
Yeah.
It can all go anywhere, right?
So let's jump back to the beginning because let's not pretend that everybody here knows you super, super well. Tell us a little bit of your story and how, leading up to the point of saying, I want to become a pastor. I think the Lord's calling me to become a pastor, which is a hugely financially rewarding career path.
Yes, that's certainly the reason that we all go.
Yeah, we all go into it for the money,
the heavenly rewards, maybe. Right?
Yeah. So tell us the story. Just start talking, man.
Yeah. So for me, a lot of that goes back to my days, my family. I grew up in St. Clair, Michigan. This was early '90s. We ended up in St. Clair, and we would drive about 30 minutes north from St. Clair to Port Huron, and we went to Colonial Woods Missionary Church up there. And we did that for a number of years until they actually decided to plant a church in St. Clair where we lived. And so my family and I, we became one of the launching families of that endeavor. And, to our Bay City folks, maybe this sounds a little bit familiar, but we did church out of the black boxes and the trailers for many, many years. I think we launched 93, 94, right around there.
Yeah.
And, for years set up in a school gymnasium every Sunday morning. And, I was on the worship team and I ran sound and I did all those things.
Were you in high school at this time or?
Yeah, like middle school, high school.
Okay.
And so in a lot of ways, that to me really began to shape my calling to just give my life to serving in the local church. And along the way, we hired a youth pastor who I spent a lot of time with, became really close to, and he just spent a lot of time discipling and pouring into me and thinking about, what it would look like to, be in church leadership, kind of as that career move.
Yeah.
And so, then graduated high school in 2001, went to Taylor University in Fort Wayne, Indiana, studied under a lot of guys there in the pastoral ministry department who were the same guys that my senior pastor growing up had studied under.
Oh, wow.
And so, the tagline was, it was a place where your calling takes shape. And I felt like it really did those years there just to develop and prepare for what it would look like to be in pastoral ministry in the future.
Yeah. So your history prior to that was portable church, right?
Yeah.
And set up, tear down and everything else.
Yep.
And you still
loved it. I know. That's what I've told some of the Bay City people along the way. Like, I know it's a lot of hard work, but at the same time, like the level of dedication that calls for, and the camaraderie of serving behind the scenes with other people week in and week out. Like that builds like a sense of community, the way that the church is supposed to be all about, connecting you relationally and living purposefully, because we're doing this for other people. We're not doing it for ourselves. Yeah. And so then through that, the great reward was that we broke ground and built a building just as I was going off to college. So did not get to reap the fruits of everything being set up on a weekly basis going forward, but it was worth it.
Yeah, there's this love of the local church that I can completely relate to. There was a couple that came up to me after church yesterday, and they introduced themselves to me and said they had been attending online for several months. They had just moved here from California, actually, and had been looking for a new church home, and told me a little bit of their story. And like they said, they'd been attending online, and they were going to come the previous Sunday in person for the first time, but they decided it would be a little weird to come when the new senior pastor candidate was there. So they waited a week, and then they came yesterday. And as I'm talking to this couple, the guy looks at me and goes, "We just feel like we need to get connected. Is there any place we can serve? Is there any place any group we can join?" And it was just so fun to talk to a couple who was like, "Man, we want to get plugged in, and we know that the best two ways to do that are to serve, right, and to join a Bible study or a small group."
I think I saw their Connect card come through, so I love that we have those intentional pathways for people to simply and cleanly as possible make those connections.
Yeah, I asked them if they filled out a card, right, and they had, and then I pointed to Sam, who was across the room, and I was like, "Well, you'll probably get an invite from your campus pastor to an upcoming Life at Hopevale deal, which is a class that we do to help people figure out how to belong." So I tell them all that, and then I make myself a mental note. I've got to make sure that actually, like, we follow through on that today, right? And then last night at like 11 o'clock, I got an email from them saying, "Hey, just got the invite to Life at Hopevale. All is good. Thanks for talking, yada, yada." So it was awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome.
How, okay, so connect us. How did Taylor lead to Hopevale? Like, fill the rest of the story in.
Yeah, so one component of the story, my time in Fort Wayne, that's where Kim and I, my now wife, we met at a church that I was serving at there. And, we started dating, and we just really kind of both sensed that, hey, God might have a future for us, but we're not exactly sure what that was. But the next step in the process was she graduated with her master's degree and moved to a place called Saginaw, Michigan, and took a job at TV5. And shortly thereafter...
It was before you got married.
Before we got married. Okay. Shortly thereafter...
So you followed her.
No.
Okay, sorry.
You can't just follow the person that you want to marry, right? That would make too much sense or something. No, so
we can talk to Nate Murray about that, because that's kind of Nate's story.
Yeah, so I threw my resume out nationwide, and I ended up in Fairfield, Connecticut. And so we did this long distance relationship thing and ended up getting engaged in that time period. And then it really kind of came this crossroads, like, okay, do I move back to Michigan, or does she move to Connecticut with me?
Wow.
And Connecticut is extremely expensive and far away from family. Yeah. Kim's very close to her family, especially. And so I felt like the right move would be for me to come back home to Michigan. And so moved to Saginaw in 2008. We got married. And then I started working some odd jobs in the area and was just praying, like, okay, God, I just took this as a leap of faith, trusting that you were going to be faithful and provide. And then a few months later, Hopevale was hiring a middle school director, and I literally lived a mile away from this building at the time.
Oh, wow.
My resume was the last one to come in, and it was just like all doors open on their end and my end. And then the way I say it is, like, the rest was history. Like 15 years go by in a blink of an eye, and here we are.
So your first role at Hopevale was middle school ministry. So you're working with Mike Garner.
Yep.
And Dan Davis. who's
Dan,
at that time was our
all the names,
inexperienced 10-year senior pastor at that point in time.
Yeah.
That's fine. What else? Talk to us about since then, right? Because you're not doing middle school right now, or that isn't the role you've been in recently.
So the other component that intersected with all that as well was the same day I started at Hopevale, I started Masters of Art in Counseling. And really my reason for that, this is like weird to say and think back on, but what kind of sparked that was like my time in Connecticut. I just felt like I found myself getting in conversations with people where I felt a little ill-equipped to speak into some of their life situations and things like that they had going on. And I mean, some of the biggest examples of that were like I was in conversations with people in the church who had like direct experience with 9/11 and stuff. Because a lot of people who live in Fairfield, like that's about the farthest out town that people commute into New York City from.
Gotcha.
And so there were just, I mean, a lot of people in the church and in the community who had those stories. And I mean, when I got in those conversations, I just felt way out of my element. Like probably we all would, but it caused me to be like, okay, if I go back to school, I can either do the MDiv or I can go the Master's in Counseling route to have some additional tools in my belt just to talk with people through difficult life stuff and whatever that might look like. So got that degree, graduated a couple years later, and right around that time is when I transitioned from middle school into the role of outreach pastor in 2012.
So what's an outreach pastor?
Yeah. So basically the job description was like help us being more intentional about how we think about being Jesus to the world outside the walls of the church. So really helping our groups focus on getting mobilized out in the community. And then, with Hopeville's kind of long-term missionary partnerships all around the world as well, how can we as a church really rally around supporting and being a part of what God is doing around the world, as well as in our own backyard, and see how he might want to grow our hearts for his world through all that.
Yeah. When I came to Hopevale, you were the outreach pastor, and you and Pete Carlson worked very closely together because he was in adult ministries when I came. And so he was neck deep in a lot of group stuff, along with Ken McGilvray, right? And all of that. How's Hopevale changed in the last 15 years since you've come?
I mean, and I say this in a positive way, but like the reality is we are literally not the same church today that we were back then. And I mean, that's just kind of the natural way of, the life of an organization and the people who flow through it through the years. I mean, we physically moved from this building, we're at the Saginaw Ministry Center right now, 2 miles up the road to our Saginaw campus. And, we were full here, and almost out of the gates there, we became full as well. And so then it was a long season of, really just asking a lot of questions about, okay, how we did ministry effectively here, is that going to continue to be the way to effectively do ministry up the road there? And so I'd say, as a staff, we were all in that journey together and kind of figuring it out because, nobody had experience on staff with navigating some of that stuff anywhere else. So we just had to kind of navigate it and figure that out internally and together. And so I think then we had kind of just a season of tension between how have we operated and been structured, and how do we need to, make some shifts and adjustments within the organization along the way to be most effective towards the mission going forward. And so in a lot of ways, right, I mean, the heart and the DNA of the church is the same, but how we try to work that out is very different. And I would say one of the other differences that we realized needed to happen along the way is when you're a smaller church, the staff really can operate more as the doers of ministry. Like we're here to provide ministry for you. But as you grow, there really has to become this shift where as staff, it became less about us being doers and more about being equippers of the body for ministry. And so for me, that's been a lot of fun. Like, I mean, I love my season and years of doing ministry in more of those hands-on ways, but I've really enjoyed even more thinking about, how are we structured as a church, and how do we pour into the staff and then the people who God is calling to be a part of this church, so that we can equip them to take and utilize the gifts and the passions that God has given each and every one of them, and to like empower and enable and say, yes, like go do that for the sake of the kingdom.
Yeah.
We want to unleash you to be able to do that ministry that God has called you to.
Well, it's obvious that, with this transition coming up for you, that your passion and love for the local church has just died.
Obviously. Yeah. It's over.
Okay. So fast forward a little bit. I got to Hopevale in August of 2018, and what some of the things that I first heard when I first came to Hopevale was the conversation about the transition strategically that you were talking about, building the building up at Center in Tittabawassee, and then realizing that we wanted to decentralize the church and go where Jesus was sending us, which led to a multi-site strategy, which was a shift. And then Hopevale decides to hire an executive pastor. So I join the staff. We go to lunch at Qdoba, if I'm remembering
That's how
correctly.
I remember it as well.
And we're sitting at Qdoba, and I ask what do you want to do someday? Like, what's your end goal for your calling as you see it now? Because none of us ever fully know. Right. And I like to tell people we're all temps in all these roles that we have as pastors. That's just the way it is,
right.
But I'll never forget, you look back at me and you're like, I want your job, man. I want to be an executive pastor. And we spent the rest of that lunch talking about why. So what was in your head at that point in time? What was it about the idea of the executive pastor role that was appealing to you? Maybe we should talk about what an executive pastor does before we get there.
Yeah, what does an executive pastor do? And it's funny because, I mean, you're right. Like when you came in at that point in Hopevale's history, we had been trying to do some things and figure it out on our own without somebody who had some of that experience along the way.
Yeah.
But I would say, I mean, I'm in a lot of ways, like I'm a self-learner. Like I can pretty quick and easily identify like what are some of the challenges that we're facing, and what are maybe some ways that we need to untangle that and bring clarity and things like that. And so I'd been seeing a lot of things about how the way that we were going about trying to become a multi-site church and things like that I was just like, oh, I think this would be an answer or a solution of the direction that we need to go. And not because I'm an expert, but because I was trying to like absorb all the information that I could about what the experts are saying about how to go about doing it and things like that.
Yeah.
And so
you've always been the most likely pastor on our staff to send me a blog post or a podcast and say, did you catch this? Because you need to listen to this. We need to talk about this.
Yeah. So, I mean, and to be even more clear, at Qdoba, I was like, I just want you to know I did apply for the executive pastor job and I didn't get it. And that's cool. But like I do see that in my future, and I want to learn from you. And that has all happened. I've learned a lot from you. But it certainly has not turned off this part of me that sees things a certain way, and the way that I feel like is the right, appropriate way to go about it. And so that's not something that, I can just turn off, right? And a lot of times, I mean, we certainly see the church and how to do things very similarly a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And that's been a lot of fun. But at the same time, then as things were moving forward, it's like, okay, I know God has this for me. I believe in my future. But at what point am I going to, launch out and kind of take that leap personally?
Right.
And before you lob another question, I'll just say one of the other components in the middle of that journey was certainly sabbatical, right? Mm-hmm. So for me, that was summer of 21 because, there was like this disruptive thing that happened in 2020 that kind of pushed everything back.
Yep.
So my family and I had the sabbatical experience in summer of 2021. I had a sabbatical coach, right? And one of the first things that he told me is that, hey, you should probably know that about 50% of the people that I coach who are on sabbatical, they will no longer be in their current ministry environment in 12 months from now. 50%.
Oh, really? Like,
Yeah.
I don't think you came back from sabbatical and told me that.
I don't think I told anybody that because I was like, I don't want to freak anybody out. But like
Right,
the reality is too, right? So I mean, I'm at least 18 months post sabbatical now. But
Yeah.
you know what I think kind of came into more clarity through that season was, okay, you know, I pull out of the day to day of my responsibilities at Hopevale, and there's a lot of things that are a good fit for me and that I love doing.
Mm-hmm.
But as you pull out of that, you just really get to hone in on more of like, okay, God, how have you created and uniquely wired me? And as I think and pray about my future,
Mm-hmm.
I'm trusting that there's like an ideal, perfect fit for me at some point in the future. And so obviously to always be open and available to what and when that might come about
Yeah.
is just kind of the posture that I've wanted to take along the way.
Yeah, and you've done that, bro. Let me talk for just a minute about my understanding of what an executive pastor does, right? There's this
question.
Yeah, this is really really good. I think it speaks to who you are and how you're gifted and wired, right? There's the chief of staff component.
Right.
There's a leadership management piece. There is it's written in my job description to champion the senior pastor. The executive pastor role is a second chair leader role. And so much of my job, since I've been at Hopevale, is to champion Dan. And now it's going to be to champion Josh and serve in that way. And I consider that a privilege and everything else. What you're hinting at, as you're talking, is the executive pastor sits in this unique seat where he's a liaison between the staff, the elders, and the congregation. And I'll never forget, the first church I worked at was Willow Creek in Chicago, and Greg Hawkins was the executive pastor when I went there. And he one day was talking to all of us, and he wrote on the board he drew three concentric circles that kind of overlapped, but not completely, right? Cause, community, and corporation. And we've talked about this, and his idea was that all three of those things exist in the church, and most of us as pastors decide to go into pastoral ministry as a career because we love the cause, we love making disciples, or we love the community. We just love relationships, and we care about people. Very few of us go into the pastoral ministry deal because of the corporation.
Right.
But as an executive pastor, you spend a disproportionate amount of time in the corporation so that everybody else doesn't have to feel the fact that the corporation is necessary. And for a church like Hopevale that's been growing since, you've been, during your tenure, Hopevale has grown and changed, and the rules have had to change, and the corporation has had to get bigger.
Right.
And there's needed to be more systems and structure and process and strategy and all of those fun things. And I've noticed, I've watched, and I would affirm your propensity to think in systems and process. Let's go back to the conversation we just had about what happens when a new couple shows up on Sunday, right? One of the things we talked about was, what's an assimilation pathway, or what's a way that we can help new folks move from visitor or guest to attender to owner or stakeholder. And I still have the little chart that you created is on my whiteboard in my office. In fact, you've always been the guy, whenever I write something on my whiteboard, which that means that I want to be thinking about it. It's important. I've always been like, man, Adam, I want to see what Adam thinks about this. I want to show him what I wrote and see how he would pick it apart and redesign it. That's been really fun. Why does that part of church leadership appeal to you?
I mean, a lot of it, I think, in a lot of ways, that is how I'm wired to some extent.
Yeah.
Like, I don't need to be, front of stage all the time and be like the forward-facing person. I'm very happy being a little bit more behind the scenes.
Right.
But as I'm behind the scenes, I'm thinking about everybody else's experience of Hopevale and the people and the systems. And if systems are working well, they don't get in the way, right? They're there, they exist. And, some words I use all the time are like, one-stop shop or one size fits all as much as possible. And when you do it that way, it becomes scalable and replicatable so that lots of people can move through this and feel cared for and have an opportunity to get connected with people who are way more relationally wired than I am. Like, those are the people we want you to connect with. But I'm thinking behind the scenes about how we can help facilitate that and make that happen, so that you can find your life with Jesus, people, and purpose here at Hopevale. So a lot of that is just my own wiring. But again, it's ultimately for people to just have the ideal experience in Jesus's church, right?
Yeah.
Because we really should be operating way better than any other organization or corporation or however you want to put it. We should be operating better than anything else on the face of this earth.
That's really good. That's really, really good. And then a year ago, a little over a year ago, we sat down to do a year-end kind of review conversation, and we talked about this idea of central ministries, which is a new concept for Hopevale as we continue to grow into being a true multi-site church, not just a church with a satellite campus, right? As we do the infrastructure stuff that will allow us to talk about a Hopevale site in Midland or Frankenmuth or St. Charles. Yeah, that kind of thing, as we're called to make a difference for the 300,000 people that live in this region who are missing God's grace, right? We step into this idea of central ministries, and it's been interesting for me to watch you lean into that and kind of surface places where we need to be future thinking and establishing systems and processes that we don't have in place yet, or that we're stuck in how we did it 20 years ago, kind of thing. I want to share a couple of examples and get you talking about it, because I think it will give people a real insight into how you think and some of the behind the scenes contributions that you've made to Hopevale and what you're probably going to be doing for your next church, right? So the first one I'll share takes us back. It predates me by quite a ways. It goes all the way back to when you were the outreach pastor.
Right.
And you came to some realizations that the way we were supporting missionaries, there were some challenges with it. And I'll let you talk about where we were and the system that you put in place to help us address some of the challenges.
Yeah, a lot of times we talk about and recognize that there is this tension between the past and honoring it and understanding it, like why was it this way along the way? But then as you look ahead, asking that question, is this still the best way to do it and to approach it? And so on the one hand and the positive side, like Hopevale is a church with over 6 decades of existence and has a heart for what God is doing around the globe. And a lot of that is tied to our own kind of origin story, right?
Yeah.
But then along the way, as we began to support missionaries, I think some of the thinking and the policies around that, it was kind of locked into an era that it wasn't as future focused as maybe it should have been. And basically what I mean by that is, in that era, a lot of churches, when they started to take on missionary partnerships, it kind of just brought with it this kind of attitude that, like, it's like a marriage. It's like until death do us part. Like, we will support you for the rest of your life, whether you're still in the field or not, kind of a thing. Or
your calling changes,
or whatever it is. And so, what I love about Hopevale is that we supported missionaries, and then the relationship with those missionaries became deep. I think part of the challenge along the way is that when the missionaries' calling changed, or they moved back from the field, back to the States, that we had a hard time reallocating those dollars to stay on mission globally, right?
I remember that. That was the point, I think, when I first became aware of the conversation. You were telling me that like 70%.
Yeah. So when we, you look at the numbers, because numbers tell a story. And so 70 some percent of our kind of global missions dollars were now helping support our longtime missionaries who were living stateside, some semi-retired and things like that. And so it kind of forces us to step into some difficult conversations to decide, okay, how do we honor these people who have served God so well and so faithfully for so many years, but make some hard decisions to realize that for the sake of the future and our investment in God's work around the world today, to make sure that our global missions dollars are going globally where they need to be. And actually, so coming up in April, we do those missions moments on Sunday. Yeah. And we have a really good video that we're going to be sharing on that Sunday. So please stay tuned for that, because it really kind of captures and highlights some of what's behind the scenes, I would say, internationally, as the church figures that out in terms of how to position funds where they really need to go.
Yeah. So here's what's really fun about that's an executive pastor-ish kind of conversation to lead, right?
Right.
Here's what's really fun about that and really fun about that role. It's behind the scenes. Nobody really sees that it's going on, and you're mostly disappointing, frustrating, angering folks as you lean into it, right?
Yep.
But at the end of the day, Hopevale is better positioned strategically for where we want to go in the future, which is what, as an XP, an executive pastor, you got to have your eye on. I heard the definition of leadership once is disappointing people at a rate that they can handle. It's such like a negative way to look at the role of leadership in the church, but sometimes it's true. And so I do want to commend the way you led that process, right? And that was hard, and there are still conversations that are being had because some of the long-time Hopevale faithful missionaries are folks that are now heading into retirement or whatever, and so those are challenging discussions, and you've handled it well.
Appreciate that. I mean, it's certainly not easy. One of the ways that I look at that, and this applies to a lot of different areas, like the mission. In that case, the mission had to be more important than the missionary.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that we don't care about the missionary, but ultimately we've got to be on target and in alignment to what God is calling his church to be today. Right?
Yeah.
So,
well, and in true Adam Harbaugh fashion, you put in place a 5-filter rubric for us to use to try and figure out and assess new missionary partners, which are coming on every year.
Yeah, and it's kind of fun. We actually just had a new applicant come in recently, and so as people apply to be a Hopevale missionary that we support, these are the filters that we just run it through. So, I mean, first, right, there's the target filter that we want to be sending people overseas in regions that experience less than like 4% of the population as evangelical Christians. And so, right, I mean, there are places around the world that, the church is fairly strong. We could certainly be there and help contribute. But if you consider the places where the presence of evangelical Christians is less than 4%, that's the target of where we want to be sending our people and our resources and things like that. And then from there, like the need filter, it means our partner has direct gospel influence with indigenous people who are in spiritual need. Yeah. So it's like that direct life-on-life component of rubbing shoulders with people who need to know Jesus, who is in you, which is why we sent you there, right? Yep. Then legacy, right? The partner trains, equips, and intends for indigenous leaders to take over the ministry. And this is a big one because, while sometimes missionaries can certainly serve an entire career in a certain place and be very effective with that, we believe that the most effective thing is to train and raise up, build up indigenous leaders who don't have as many of the obstacles like language and cultural understanding and things like that to overcome. And so we want partners who are intentional about that being their goal, right? And then the partnership filter, right? The partner invites us to involve and mobilize our congregation in ministry opportunities along the way. So raising awareness, praying, potentially going, sending
Opportunity for
support,
short-term trips and that kind of stuff.
any and all of those kinds of things. So more opportunities like that coming in the future. And then finally, the accountability filter. This partner invites accountability from us, right? That there's alignment theologically, spiritually, financially, relationally, all of those things from Hopevale. Because if and when we as a church are choosing to support you, we don't want it to be a matter of like, yeah, we just write a check and send it off and pat ourselves on the back and feel good that we're doing our part.
Right.
Like, no, we want it to be, we are in this with you together for as long as God has you in that place where he's called you to serve and us to partner in that service.
That's really, really good. And now we have Rhonda Gross on our staff as the Global Missions Director. And I've told her one sentence job description is to grow Hopevale's heart for the world.
Yeah.
Right. That kind of thing.
Yeah. She's awesome.
Yeah. So that's an example of like, a behind the scenes thing that you've been able to be a part of, where a new system needed to be put in place. And that's years in the making, conversations, process, ebbs and flows, and ultimately a better system. Let me share another example and ask you to talk about this a little bit. We just had an elder staff retreat, and you came to me and told me that like a year ago you had taken your staff team through Patrick Lencioni's Working Genius stuff, which was about figuring out where in your job you might be thriving or just charged and fired up, and where in your job you might be frustrated based on how you're wired.
Yeah.
And I was intrigued by it, and I'm like, I haven't read that book. Let's take the whole staff through it. So you led the staff through that at our retreat, and talk us through that. Just briefly, just give us an example, because that's like the other side of it. And now we're talking about the executive pastor being the liaison between the staff, staff development, elders, congregations.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I mean, I love Patrick Lencioni's stuff. And so basically the framework for this is within an organization, how do you take an idea, and who comes up with the idea?
Yeah.
How do you take an idea and flesh that out from kind of concept to tweaking it and making it most effective, and then it going all the way down to the people who implement it and bring others along and just make it all happen from start to finish in a really effective way. And so, his framework, there are 6 areas, 6 different types of working geniuses. And I'm going to pull it up because I think I have most of it in my head, but just for the sake of not missing any.
While he's pulling it up, the book is called Working Genius, and you can get it on Amazon. If you want to read it, there's like a $10 assessment that you can take that will help you figure out why you're invigorated and why you're frustrated in different parts of your job or whatever. Yeah,
and it's definitely helpful for individuals to know, but even more valuable when you can take an entire team through it together.
Yeah.
Because you begin to see kind of where and how everybody fits together, and how different geniuses might be better positioned in certain conversations or areas and things like that. So the 6 types of genius, the first is wonder. And this is like the person who can look at things and say, I think we can do it better, right? Like there's a better way to go about doing that. And then from there, you've got the genius of invention. So they kind of take what are we looking at doing better, and they'll invent something around it. A lot of our inventors are like our Sunday morning teachers around here at Hopevale, because they love to invent a sermon. For me, that's like a competency. It's not my genius.
Yeah.
From there, discernment, and these are the people who can just hear the idea and kind of what's been created around it and be like, yeah, that's it. Like, we got to go after that. That's the way. Or you might hear it and be like, you might be missing this. You might need to tweak it a little bit. And then the galvanizers, right? These are the people who like rally and inspire people around it. Our campus pastors are galvanizers, right? So that was kind of a fun thing to see how galvanizing plays out. enablement. These people provide encouragement and assistance for an idea or project. So these are all the people who are totally bought into what we're doing along the way and help make it happen. And then finally, tenacity, the gift of pushing projects or tasks to completion to achieve the results. So again, it's kind of this framework from start to finish. You need every one of these genius areas at work in the organization. And then as individuals, as you kind of find out what your geniuses are, you get to say, am I really in my best fit where I'm making my best contribution? That's probably at best you're working in your geniuses. You might be in your competencies and you're okay there. You can do it, but it's not quite your genius as long as it's not your frustration area where like you can do some of those things, but you don't get life from it. And that's what's been really fun to see. It's like some people have genius in areas that I don't want to do. Like it's not my specific area, but when you realize that they love doing that as much as I love wondering and discerning, then we all get to work really well together.
Yeah, it was really interesting.
Yeah.
There's 2 people on our staff that have the same 2 working geniuses, and like they're both in this conversation right now. So that's
right.
That was affirming.
Wonder and discernment.
Wonder and discernment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Executive pastors, they get it right. Can we say that?
Heck yes, we can say that.
All right.
Just got to bring more people along.
That's true. Exactly. All right. Okay. So let's talk future a little bit. What's next for you? You're going to be done here at the end of the month at Hopevale. How can we be praying? How much can you tell us at this point? This is where I put you on the spot a little bit, at least. So
So I mean, definitely some things in the work, and they're coming together because it's not quite finalized yet. I won't give too many specifics, but certainly trusting God in that process, and would love to have my Hopevale family praying for me and my family along the way. One of the other things that I've acknowledged throughout this process is that I kind of joked with the leaders I trained the other night, like, I know my timing is horrible in all of this.
Yeah, it kind of is.
And so the first thing I want to say, so the same way that when you got hired, I was like, Paul, I want you to know that I did apply for your job. I do want everybody to know that I did not apply for the senior pastor role, because I don't feel like that's my best gifting and contribution to the church. And so I do, because of my discernment, I do think Josh is the right guy, and I love seeing Hopevale affirm that in and through the process. So I'm excited for Josh. I'm excited for Hopevale and the future that God has in store here. And I am sad, after investing 15 years of myself and my ministry into this place, it's really hard to realize that I'm at that moment where like I'm moving to a different opportunity, and hopefully it'll be a place where I can continue to pour into, what God's doing in and through a local church. But I'm sad. I'm gonna miss the people and all of the work that has been put in. A lot of it behind the scenes here at Hopevale. So that's a little bit of my current reality.
So a couple different opportunities that you're praying through.
Yep.
We'll definitely be praying. And there is this weird mix of emotions that come.
Yeah.
And I remember when you first came to me and said, hey, I have this, you told me about one of the opportunities, and you're like, how do I know? When do I officially tell you that I'm looking somewhere? And all that fun stuff. I remember the conversation we had about there's a release from and there's a calling to, and the challenge of transitions like this is knowing how to know when both of those things are in place, because that's when you say yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And all that stuff. But here we are. We're headed towards the end of the month. And I know what you really want as far as the congregation to be able to express their appreciation for you would be for a long line of people to hug you on a Sunday morning kind of thing, because you're big into that.
Yeah, I'm a hugger. No, that's sarcasm.
Yeah. What?
If you want a hug, I'll give you a hug. But to answer what I think the question is there, like, I think as a person who's been more behind the scenes, like, I just would love to hear from you if you have anything to share about what you have loved about Hopevale over the years, right?
Yeah.
And so that would be encouraging to me to hear from the congregation about how this church and kind of our DNA and the heart behind all that we try to do, just how that's impacted your life and your walk with Jesus, because that's what's most important.
Yeah. Yeah. We are wired similarly, because I remember leaving my last church thinking, I just want to know, I just need like 2 or 3 people to come up to me and say, here's how this place has made a difference. And I don't even need them to know that I was a part of that.
Right.
I just need to hear that this place has made a difference in their efforts to know and follow Jesus, right?
Yeah.
And they're walking more closely with him as a result. So this coming Sunday, the 26th, will be your last Sunday. We are going to ask you to stand in the lobby after both services at our Saginaw campus so people can come up and express whatever they want to express to you, appreciation, hugs, whatever it is that people want to do. So that'll be your last Sunday, and then we have some things we're going to do with staff in other ways that we can express our appreciation to you and the value that you have brought to this ministry. My last question: if you have a parting shot that you want to share with our Hopevale podcast listeners, what's the last thing you would want them to hear from you on a microphone as you're getting ready to transition off staff?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, ultimately, I hope that, part of what I have brought has been that, gospel and kingdom focus. And so I think, my parting shot would be, it kind of took me back a little bit to, I think it was the message that I preached this summer, Acts 10, Peter and Cornelius, and just that whole story and situation. And what I love about that story is that, here's Peter, a guy who has, his entire life, he's been brought up to believe a certain thing about the Gentiles and, as a Jew, what was important for him to do and operate and how to behave and how to maybe even think or treat the Gentiles or whatever. And like that was so ingrained and embedded in him, and that was like what he knew from God to be right, all the way up until God revealed a vision to him that showed him that God was beginning to do some new things in the world because of Jesus and through Jesus and all of those things, that what was once the case, he's taking away some of the requirements and the behaviors and the attitudes towards other people because God wanted to include them in this kingdom opportunity as well. Yeah. So as I preached through that, I really honed in on the moment where when Peter went to Cornelius's house and walked in the living room of the Gentiles, a place that he was not supposed to be as a Jewish guy. And they're like, okay, tell us what God wants you to tell us. And like the first thing out of his mouth was like, I now realize that, God has shown me that I should treat no person as though they are different or outside of what God wants to do in his kingdom. And I was like, I think that I now realize moment is so important because we all have areas and things that we have honed on to through the years. Yeah. And a lot of times we might even think of it as examples that like, this is straight from the Bible and this is God's way and the only way. But as you begin to kind of peel apart, like, what were maybe some of the cultural components that are overlaid some of those perspectives, we might have to do some work to peel apart some of those things and ask, okay, what is God's true heart and intention for his people in the world today? And how does his church need to be best positioned and the posture that they need to take to best reach them? And so I think my parting shot would be, Hopevale, like you've got a brand new senior pastor. We're in the year 2023 right now. And so for such a time as this, I think God is positioning the church to be full of people who are like, I need to just lay down any preconceived notions that I have about people or ministry or building walls, all those different things that we've talked about quite a bit over the last couple of years. Strip all that stuff away and keep the kingdom and the gospel as the main focus as you guys go and share that hope with everybody that we come in contact with. That would be my parting shot. So be willing to have those I now realize moments, be open to the change that I think needs to come in some areas so that Hopevale can kind of unentangle some of the approaches from the past so that the future of ministry doesn't get hindered.
That's really, really good. And you can say we.
I know.
Because
we are still in
Big
this
C
together.
Church.
Exactly.
Yes.
I know.
Going to miss serving with you on a regular basis. A lot of people are. On behalf of Hopevale, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for 15 years of faithful adherence to the Holy Spirit convictions that He's put inside you to drive change. I know driving change is sometimes a lonely place. I just want to let you know that the church that you're going to is going to need some change as well. And
Right.
so we're going to get to, from different addresses, still co-labor in this idea of leading and serving. And I have this thing on my wall from the first church I worked at. It says there's nothing like the local church when the local church is working right. Mm-hmm. And I know that you share that same passion and conviction. And so we're all excited to see you take that with you to Jesus next for you. And so just thanks. I'm just going to leave it there.
Thank you. It's been a privilege, and you had us all do like a 1-sentence job description along the way. And, my job description was to bring clarity, unity, and my favorite word, alignment, to the staff, to the church. And that's really my heart going forward. Clarity on stuff, unity on stuff, and alignment to the gospel and the kingdom and the work that we all have in front of us. So it's been a privilege.
Yeah, that's really good, man. And thank you for taking the time to have this conversation. Thank you to all of you that have listened and watched. You have one more opportunity to, on a Sunday morning, say thanks and give Adam a hug and tell him that you love him and all those things that he's really looking forward to hearing. So with that, I think we're done with this podcast, and we'll see you next week. The next time, I guess it's next week, the next time we take a deeper dive. Thanks.
Signing off.
Thank you for watching the Deeper Dive video podcast. To check out our full library, make sure to subscribe by clicking the button below. Also, make sure to select the bell icon in order to be notified of any new content as it is posted. If you would like to give to the Lord here at Hopevale and support the ministry, you can give by visiting hopevale.org/give. Thank you again for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you and your family at Hopevale Church.